My name is Sarah Marsh. The night my husband lost his leg, I lost my faith in everyone around me. I remember the sounds more than anything else. Screeching tires, shattering glass, metal grinding against asphalt. I was inside making dinner when I heard it. My heart stopped. I ran out into the driveway and saw our truck at the bottom, crushed and smoking. Ben was pinned underneath, his leg mangled, bleeding everywhere. Kyle, Ben's best friend, was screaming for help, saying Ben had slipped the handbrake while checking something underneath. But something felt off. Kyle's hands were shaking too much. His story didn't fit right. As I knelt beside my husband, blood soaking my jeans, I whispered to him, "What really happened?" He just stared at me, pain in his eyes, unable or unwilling to answer. The paramedics arrived and rushed him away. One of them muttered something that made my blood run cold. "This brake line's been cut." The sirens faded into the night as I sat in the hospital waiting room, my mind spinning. Kyle sat next to me trying to comfort me, but I couldn't focus on his words. I kept replaying his expression when he'd arrived at the hospital. The fear in his eyes. The way he kept glancing at his phone. I'd known Kyle for 8 years. He and Ben had been friends since high school, inseparable. They did everything together. Went fishing, worked on cars, had weekly poker nights. I remembered the early days of my marriage, laughing with both of them at dinner tables, feeling part of something solid and safe. But that night changed everything. The doctor finally came out and gave us the news. Ben's leg was too damaged. They couldn't save it. He would need an amputation. I felt my world tilt. My husband, who loved hiking and playing soccer, was about to lose his leg. And somehow I knew it wasn't just an accident. Something darker was happening. And I was just beginning to understand the depth of the lies surrounding me. Ben woke up in the hospital room, angry and confused. Within hours, he directed all his rage at me. "Why didn't you call faster?" he demanded, his face twisted. "Maybe they could have saved my leg if you'd called immediately." I tried to explain that I'd called right away, but he wouldn't listen. The doctors came in and confirmed they had to amputate. I watched Ben's face as they told him. He was devastated, sure, but I also saw something else. Relief, maybe? Or resignation. As if he'd expected this outcome. Then something strange happened. An insurance representative showed up within 24 hours. 24 hours. I'd never heard of insurance moving that fast. Kyle somehow appeared at the hospital with paperwork ready, helping me fill out the claim forms, guiding my hand, pointing to where I needed to sign. I was overwhelmed and grateful then. I thought he was being supportive. Looking back, I realized he was orchestrating something. That's when I overheard them talking in Ben's hospital room. Kyle leaned over and whispered, "At least it's done now." I froze in the doorway, not breathing. Those words haunted me. Done. What was done? What had they planned? Ben came home from the hospital after a week of recovery. The homecoming should have been tender, but instead, his family turned cold. His mother called me careless for not maintaining the truck better. His sister posted cryptic Facebook messages about people who don't pay attention to their surroundings. I tried to defend myself, but no one listened. It was like they'd all decided I was guilty of something, though no one said what. Ben started taking pain medication, prescription pills that should have lasted, but I noticed the bottle was empty after just a few days. I asked him about it. He said the pain was worse than expected. I believed him then. He needed help with everything. I became his nurse, his maid, his emotional support system. I cooked, cleaned, and helped him with physical therapy. I gave him everything. But something was shifting in our relationship. The intimacy was gone. He looked at me differently now, like I owed him something. One night I found a text on his phone that made my stomach drop. It was from him to Kyle. "She bought it." Bought what? What exactly did I believe that wasn't true? I wanted to ask, but fear stopped me. I sensed I was standing on the edge of something dangerous. Ben spiraled over the following weeks. He became paranoid and cruel. He snapped at me over tiny things, the way I made his coffee, how I arranged his pillows. He'd repeat the same phrase over and over. "You owe me for this." For what? For the accident? For not calling fast enough? I was confused and hurting, but I stayed. I thought my love could fix things. The intimacy between us disappeared completely. We slept in separate rooms. He wouldn't let me touch him. One night, I heard him on the phone in the living room. His voice was low and urgent. If she finds out, we're both screwed, he hissed. My hands went cold. Who was he talking to? I crept down the hallway and saw him pacing, phone pressed to his ear. I couldn't see who was on the other end, but I knew. It had to be Kyle. When he saw me, he quickly hung up and stared at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Not love. Not even kindness. Something darker. He smiled, but it was cruel. Eavesdropping on your husband now? He asked. I said nothing. I went back to bed and lay awake, my heart pounding, trying to piece together what was happening. I confronted Ben the next morning. I asked him directly what Kyle had meant about her finding out. He laughed at me. You're paranoid, he said coldly. You want me to be the villain in your story, so you can feel better about neglecting me. I wasn't prepared for how effectively he gaslit me. He made me question my own ears, my own memory. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was being unfair to him during his recovery. He threw a glass against the wall and I jumped. Then he started crying, apologizing, saying he was just stressed from the pain. He held me and whispered that I was the only one he loved, the only one he could trust. I wanted to believe him so badly. I wanted my husband back. But those words kept echoing. If she finds out, we're both screwed. The next morning, Kyle visited like nothing had happened. He was acting normal, jovial, bringing beer and telling jokes. But then he casually dropped an envelope on the coffee table. I glanced at it. It was an insurance check. In both Ben's and Kyle's names. My mind reeled. Why would Kyle's name be on Ben's insurance check? I said nothing, but my suspicion bloomed into something solid and terrifying. Over the following weeks, Ben suddenly had money. New gadgets appeared in the house. Expensive deliveries came to the door. He bought himself designer watches and new clothes. Meanwhile, my card kept declining at the grocery store. When I asked Ben about it, he said the bank had frozen his account for some reason. But his watch was brand new. His designer sunglasses were designer. The pieces weren't fitting together. One morning I tried to use our joint credit card at the store, but it declined. I felt embarrassed, humiliated. That night I asked Ben what was happening with our finances. He became defensive. I don't know what you're talking about, he snapped. I showed him the declined card. He shrugged. Banks make mistakes. But they didn't. Something was very wrong. I started checking our accounts more carefully, noticing withdrawals I didn't recognize. Money disappearing. And then I received a call that changed everything. It was from the insurance company. A representative asked me to confirm my signature on a particular document. I went pale. What document? I asked. The insurance release for the claim filed before the accident, she said. I had never signed that document. I would remember signing something that important. I confronted Ben with the phone call. I told him the insurance company said I'd signed something I never signed. He smiled at me in this cold way and said, "You signed it. You just don't remember." He spoke with such certainty that I actually started doubting myself. Had I signed it? Was my memory failing? Ben's family sided with him immediately when I mentioned it to them. His mother said, "Sarah, honey, you've been so stressed. Maybe you forgot." Kyle continued visiting like nothing was wrong, bringing over beer, acting casual. It was surreal. I felt like I was going crazy. The person I loved most was telling me I was losing my mind, and everyone around him was agreeing. That's when I made a decision. I went to the insurance company office by myself. I asked to speak with someone, and a sympathetic clerk pulled up the file. She whispered to me that the claim had been filed 2 days before the accident. 2 days ago. The timestamp was clear on the computer screen. My stomach dropped into my shoes. The accident hadn't happened yet when they filed the claim. That wasn't possible unless they'd planned it. Unless they'd known it was coming. I excused myself and went to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't turn the key in the ignition. That night, I received an anonymous text message. It said simply, "Stop digging. He's not the man you think." I stared at it for hours. Who sent this? Someone who knew what was happening. Someone who wanted to warn me or scare me away from the truth. I thought about all the pieces. The insurance claim was filed early. Kyle's name on the check. Ben's sudden wealth. The cut break line the paramedic mentioned. The text. She bought it. All of it pointed to one horrible conclusion. They had planned this together. My husband and his best friend had plotted to fake an accident, file an insurance claim, and collect money. But something had gone wrong. Instead of just scaring me with a minor accident, Ben had actually been seriously injured. Instead of collecting money and disappearing together, Ben had lost his leg. He couldn't live a normal life anymore. That's why he was so angry. That's why he blamed me. He was furious that his plan had backfired, that he was stuck with me instead of free with the money. The weight of this realization nearly crushed me. I remembered that Kyle had an ex-girlfriend named Leah. I'd met her a few times at parties. I tracked down her number through Facebook and called her nervously. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown. When she arrived, I immediately told her I needed to ask her something about Kyle. She seemed wary but curious. I explained that I suspected Kyle and Ben had done something illegal. Her eyes widened. Actually, she said quietly, Kyle used to brag about Ben finally getting what he deserved. I thought he was joking, but now I'm not sure. My heart raced. This was a clue. She continued. He said something about it happening soon, that they'd be set for life. Then she told me something that changed everything. She said Kyle had accidentally sent her a voice memo meant for someone else. She still had it. Her finger trembled as she texted it to me. The audio file sat in my messages like a bomb. I thanked her and drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. I sat in my parked car outside my house and pressed play on the voice memo. The audio was muffled, but the voices were unmistakable. Kyle and Ben talking and laughing, clinking beer bottles. Then Ben's voice. We'll split the payout 50-50. She'll be fine. She always lands on her feet. Kyle's voice slurred. Just make sure it scares her enough that she doesn't push too hard on the insurance paperwork. Played it again. And again. Each time the words sank deeper. They had actually discussed this. They had actually planned to frame me to make it look like I was negligent. If something went really wrong, I would be blamed. My hands shook as I made a decision. I called Kyle. The phone rang once, twice. He answered on the third ring. Hey Sarah. What's up? He sounded casual, like nothing was wrong. We need to talk, I said. Not over the phone. Come over. Ben's sleeping. There was a pause. Then he said, okay, I'll be there in 20 minutes. I saved the voice memo to 3 different places. I forwarded it to myself multiple times. I needed insurance in case something happened to my phone. Kyle arrived looking nervous. He was sweating even though it was cool outside. We sat on the porch and I told him I knew the truth. His face went white. He started stammering, denying, but then I told him I had the voice memo. He broke. He just completely fell apart. His hands shook as he tried to explain. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said, his words slurring slightly. He smelled like alcohol. It wasn't supposed to crush him. Just scare her. Just scare you. I recorded this entire conversation on my phone, pressing it against my leg so he couldn't see. He confessed piece by piece. The plan had been simple. They'd cut the brake line partially, hoping the truck would roll slowly down the driveway, causing a minor crash. They wanted an excuse to file an insurance claim, blame me for not maintaining the vehicle properly, and disappear with the money before I could figure out what happened. But Ben had miscalculated. The brake failure was more severe than they'd planned. The truck gained too much speed. It wasn't a minor accident. It was catastrophic. Kyle left around midnight, and I sat alone in my kitchen, shaking. Everything made sense now. Ben's anger wasn't about losing his leg. It was about losing the freedom that money would have given him. He was angry that his carefully laid plan had blown up in his face. He was angry that he was stuck with me instead of starting a new life somewhere else. The realization broke something inside me. But it also crystallized something else, determination. I was going to handle this carefully and deliberately. I couldn't let emotion guide me. I had to be smart. I copied the voice memo to a hidden flash drive and placed it in my jewelry box under a false bottom. I saved copies to the cloud. I wrote down every detail I could remember. Dates, times, conversations. I created a timeline of events that showed the evidence of their plan. By morning, I had a roadmap for what I needed to do next. I decided to play a long game. I started acting like I'd accepted Ben's version of events. I cooked his favorite meals. I was tender and affectionate. I pretended to be emotionally broken by everything that had happened. I let him think I'd abandoned my suspicions. He relaxed around me. He even started bragging to Kyle about things, knowing I would overhear. I sat in my car outside and made notes. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in fraud cases. I told him everything, and his eyes widened as I explained. If you can prove fraud, he said carefully, you won't just walk away from this clean. You'll be able to take everything. The house, the assets, everything he's hidden. I felt cold hearing those words. Everything I'd suspected was true. Everything I feared was real. But I also felt something else. Power. For the first time since the accident, I had power. My lawyer advised me to be careful not to tip my hand too soon. If you reveal what you know before we have all the evidence gathered, he warned, they'll destroy everything. They'll find the voice memo, they'll delete their messages, they'll cover their tracks. So I continued my act. I let Ben think I was broken. He lowered his guard completely. He'd call Kyle while I was nearby, and they'd discuss things in code. Round 2 is what they called it. Some new scheme, presumably. I recorded those calls. My lawyer began filing paperwork quietly. He contacted the police with the fraud evidence. He worked with the insurance company to open an investigation. All the while, I made dinner and held Ben's hand and pretended to be the devoted wife. It was exhausting. Some nights I would lie awake, my body vibrating with rage that I had to suppress. But I held strong. I knew what was coming. I arranged a family dinner. I invited Ben's parents, his sister, Kyle, everyone. We sat around our dining table like one big happy family. At the end of the meal, I casually mentioned that I was thinking of writing a memoir. About betrayal, I said. About trust broken. About discovering lies in the people you love most. Everyone froze. Ben's mother put down her fork. His father exchanged a look with his wife. Kyle went very pale. Ben laughed it off, saying I was joking, that I was still processing everything. But I could see the fear in their eyes. That night my house was broken into. Only one place was disturbed. My jewelry box. They came for the flash drive. They didn't know I'd already made backups. They didn't know my lawyer already had copies. I played the victim, calling the police to report the break-in. The officers came, took statements, filed a report. I knew Ben would tell Kyle what he'd done, trying to cover their tracks. But it was too late. The next morning, Kyle's ex-girlfriend Leah called me. Turn on the news, she said urgently. I did. A local news segment was covering an investigation into fraudulent insurance claims in our area. Ben's name was mentioned. They were investigating a pattern of staged accidents with inflated insurance claims. The police had raided a workshop belonging to someone matching Kyle's description. I felt my heart pound as I watched. My lawyer called shortly after. It's happening, he said. The police want to bring them in for questioning. I thanked him and hung up. That afternoon, Ben came home from an appointment to find police at our door. He was taken in for questioning. The next hours were a blur. I answered questions from detectives. I provided them with the voice memo, the timeline, the evidence. They looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and respect. One detective told me, "You handled this exactly right. You didn't confront them. You didn't tip them off. You let the evidence speak." When Ben was brought home that evening, he was different. Broken. He screamed at me the moment he walked through the door. "You did this to me," he shouted, his face red with rage and betrayal. I looked at him calmly. My voice was steady when I spoke. "No," I said quietly. "You did this to yourself." He lunged toward me, but the detective who was still present stepped between us. "Don't," the officer said firmly. Ben was arrested that night. Kyle had disappeared for several hours, but the police found him at a motel on the edge of town. He was arrested too. Ben's family's reaction was immediate and brutal. His mother called me, not to check on me, but to ask if it was true. When I confirmed it, she hung up without another word. They wanted nothing to do with any of us. They acted like they'd had no idea what Ben and Kyle were planning, that they were innocent bystanders. I knew better. They had all been complicit in their own way. Ben's anger, his entitlement, his belief that he deserved whatever he wanted, that had been nurtured by them his entire life. The case moved through the legal system slowly. Ben and Kyle both hired lawyers. Ben's lawyer claimed Kyle had manipulated him into the plan. Kyle's lawyer claimed Ben was the mastermind. They turned on each other exactly as I knew they would. The loyalty they'd shared, the brotherhood, the friendship of 8 years, it shattered under pressure. Ben's family continued to avoid me. I saw his mother once at the grocery store, and she looked through me like I was invisible. His sister unfollowed me on Facebook. I'd become the villain in their story, the woman who destroyed their family. The truth didn't matter to them, only their comfort. The detective called me one day and told me they'd found something at Kyle's house during the search. Financial records showing a pattern of similar schemes over several years. Kyle had been doing this before with other people. Ben wasn't his first victim of manipulation, and he wasn't his first co-conspirator. Kyle was a career criminal. I realized Ben had been played just as much as I had, though his role was active rather than passive. The breakthrough came when Kyle decided to cooperate with the prosecution. He was terrified of prison, facing years inside. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he confessed everything. He sat in court and detailed how he'd manipulated Ben over months, how he'd suggested the plan, knowing Ben was struggling financially, how they'd researched insurance fraud together, how Kyle had actually cut the brake line while Ben watched. He admitted the scheme had gone wrong, that he'd never expected Ben to be seriously injured. His confession, combined with the voice memo, the forged documents, and the financial records, painted an undeniable picture. I sat in the courtroom and listened as Kyle broke down, saying Ben had told him I'd never figure it out, that I was too focused on being a good wife to notice the lies. I felt nothing when he said that. No satisfaction. No joy. Just a hollow sadness for what my marriage had been. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Ben's lawyer tried everything. He painted me as a controlling wife who'd driven Ben to desperation. He suggested I was mentally unstable and had misunderstood innocent conversations. He questioned the validity of my evidence. But the voice memo was impossible to deny. The insurance claim filed before the accident was a fact. The forged signature was documented. The cut brake line was established. Ben took the stand in his own defense, trying to charm the judge, trying to make himself sympathetic. He'd lost his leg after all. But the judge wasn't buying it. She listened to the evidence carefully, studying the timeline, examining each piece of documentation. Her expression remained neutral throughout. When Ben tried to pin all the blame on Kyle, claiming he'd been manipulated, she interrupted him. "Mr. Marsh," she said coldly, "you signed off on an insurance claim before the accident occurred. That's not manipulation. That's a conspiracy." The verdict came back guilty on all counts. Insurance fraud, conspiracy, attempted grand theft. Ben was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Kyle, due to his cooperation, received 4 years. I sat in the courtroom as the judge read the sentences. Ben's face crumpled. His mother, who'd shown up for the verdict, glared at me as if I'd personally wielded the gavel. I walked out of that courthouse into sunlight that felt different, cleaner somehow, like I'd been living in shadow and was finally seeing the world clearly again. My lawyer met with me afterward to discuss the civil settlement. The court had awarded me the insurance restitution, which meant returning the money Ben and Kyle had received. Additionally, since Ben had used marital funds for the scheme, the court was awarding me the house in the divorce settlement. I was going to be okay financially. I was going to survive this. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate publicly. Instead, I quietly started my life over. I sold the house and used the money to move to the city. I started a small interior design business, something I'd always dreamed about but never pursued while I was taking care of Ben. The work fulfilled me in ways I hadn't expected. My business grew slowly but steadily. Through mutual friends, word got back to me about Ben's life in prison. He was angry and bitter, unchanged by his circumstances. He'd sent a letter to some of our old friends blaming me for everything, claiming I'd set him up, that I'd orchestrated his downfall, that I'd betrayed him. Not one person who received those letters believed him. They all knew the truth now. They all knew what he'd tried to do. My quiet success, built on my own strength and determination, became its own kind of response. I didn't need to say anything. My life said it all. After 2 years in prison, Ben was allowed a single visitor. He expected it to be his mother. Instead, I showed up. He stared at me through the prison glass like he was seeing a ghost. I wasn't there to be cruel. I was there for closure. For myself, not for him. I told him that I'd forgiven him, not because what he did was forgivable, but because holding on to rage was destroying me. I told him I was building a good life, that I was happy. I told him I hoped someday he'd understand the damage he'd caused and learn from it. He just stared at me with dead eyes. He didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge any wrongdoing. He just said, "You ruined my life." I left a single photograph on the table between us. It was from our wedding day, the day before the accident, when he still had two legs and I still believed he loved me. I stood up to leave. As I walked away, I turned back once and said softly, "You ruined your own life." Years later, I'm sitting in my design studio in the city, looking out at the skyline. The business is thriving. I have friends who know me, really know me, not the false version I became when I was trying to save my marriage. I have healed mostly. Some days are still hard. Some days I remember the sound of the crash, the hospital waiting room, the weight of believing lies. But I've learned something valuable about myself. I learned that I'm stronger than I ever thought, that I can survive betrayal and come out the other side. That quiet resilience is more powerful than loud revenge. Ben was released from prison last year. I heard through the grapevine that he's struggling, that his family has distanced themselves from him, that he's angry and alone. I don't feel anything when I hear these things. Not sadness, not satisfied, just acceptance. Some people lose a leg in an accident, but some people lose something worse. They lose their soul. He thought losing his leg was the worst thing that could happen to him. He was wrong. The worst thing was discovering that the person he'd become, the person willing to betray, to lie, to hurt someone who loved him, was irredeemable. And that's something no prosthetic can fix.